Life and Wellness Committee here at Searstone, and I'm here this afternoon to tell you about a new program that we're launching today called Searstone Spotlight. In the past, we've had a number of presentations by Searstone residents and staff that shared their personal experiences. Recent ones that come to mind are Doris Vaughn's description of her years at the Carter White House and Scott Robertson's stories of his life with his partner and wife, who was a savant musician. The committee decided that we should expand on this and create a more formal series for all of you. And we generated a list of about 20 different possibilities for names and finally settled on Searstone Spotlight. These spotlight presentations will not be a view of a particular topic, nor will they be a sharing of expertise from one's career. What they will be instead is a depiction of a particular time in one's life. And so today the spotlight is on Janice and Matt Matthews, who will be talking about their adventures in Alaska. Please welcome them.
Okay, so we started out in LA. We came up the Alcan, and here's somewhere around here. I can't read these; they're a little too small for me. Is Fairbanks? There's Fairbanks, and Big Delta is sitting in here. There's two of us, two graduate students that went to Alaska at the same time. My best friend up here studied up here. I studied down around here. This would be Denali. This is the Yukon Delta. You can see that it's pretty flat in through here. There's some mountains there, there's some mountains here. Okay, why did we go to Alaska? Well, the first thing is I didn't want to go to Alaska. I wanted to gather data for my doctoral thesis on the sediment as it transfers from freshwater to saltwater. That's a delta. And I wanted to do it in Los Angeles, or just outside of Los Angeles, where I could go there on the weekends, gather samples, come back and process them. I'd have fair weather, everything would be nice and hunky-dory. But my advisor, for his doctoral thesis, he studied the Amazon. He said, go to Alaska, do the delta in Alaska, and what can you do with your major advisor? Except say yes, sir. So we did that. That's why we went. We were young, and we were completely clueless. Okay, so we knew we had to prepare for the trip. So what did we do? Well, there we go, doing it wrong. Freeze-dried food. We needed that for the trip because we wanted to keep the boat light. We weren't sure how much food we'd be able to get when we got there, so we brought most of it with us, and we tested out a lot of food. The freeze-dried food we tested out, we're just starting because of the space program, and some of it was pretty good. There was a freeze-dried applesauce that was the best applesauce I've ever had because it was riced apples instead of just pounded to mush. It was really nice. Ice cream was pretty good. There was a product called Galley Slave Beef Stew. And what does that envision to you? And you got the right idea. Janice was cooking it up, and the odor was filling the apartment. And she said, I'm not eating this. And I eat almost anything. Particularly in China, I've eaten a lot of things. So I said, it can't be that bad. I'll try it. It was that bad. I had one mouthful and that was the end of that. we had to find a suitable boat. So we tested several boats, and I found a couple that I really liked. They had the Deep V, they were made for oceans, they were trimarans, they were inboard, outboard. It was a good boat, I thought. My advisor thought, no. We need a flat bottom boat because you're going to be on the river. I said, but I'm going to be out in the ocean. Oh, it'll be all right, the river will hold their power, don't worry about it. Okay, so then we had to build up the boat. We had to install waterproof compartments below the deck. We had to install a radio direction finder. We had to install sampling devices and pressure devices and all sorts of things. So we did that. And the preparation for that, when I was about 16, I had a lathe in the basement that I worked with. When I got to be 19, I got to do gas welding. When I got to be 21, I was in sports car racing, building up engines and working on suspensions. When I went to West Virginia, which was just before, which was a little ways before we got to Alaska, I was working and I took 2 courses in machine work. Some of the fellow graduate students wondered why I did this, but I knew that I was going to be sampling something and I needed to be able to build things. I need to be able to handle arc welding of stainless steel. I needed to be able to shear 1/4 inch plate. So I needed to do that stuff. I used that to build the equipment for the sampling. So I built all my own equipment, we redid the boat. On the way up, well, before we started, I had towed all over the U.S., towed race cars and towed my personal belongings and Genesis. And so I had plenty of time to practice towing. But in LA, we kind of had a hard time with the clutch, so I had the clutch replaced just before we left. And at that particular time, there was a soothsayer who said that if San Andreas Fault was going to turn off that year, and LA and all of the West Coast was going to fall into the ocean. And the mechanic I had, his wife believed it, and they had to leave town, and I barely got the clutch turn. The graduate students, well, the good people of LA would call up UCLA and say, what's this about us falling into the ocean? And if it got to the graduate students would say, oh no, that's not right. The fault's going to go all right, but it's the rest of the East that's going to fall into the Atlantic. The faculty didn't think much of that, and they tried to calm us down about that. But it impacted us. I went to the bank just as we were ready to leave, and we had transferred $2,000 from our savings account into our checking account so that I'd be able to write checks. And when they gave me the money that I asked for, they said, you have $20 left in your account. And I said, no, we have $2,020 left in the account. No, that's not what we show. Well, they said, well, they're supposed to be, check it out. They had taken the savings account money and put it in a checking account of the same number, not the same person. So we got that straightened out. And then we started to go. Okay, here's the apartment, so we're getting ready to go. We've got, we've got our down jackets, we've got our down sleeping bags, we've got all sorts of stuff piled up, we've got somebody sitting on the floor here. And then there's the boat. So this is the boat we have. Notice it's kind of flat bottom. It does have a prow on it, which is a nice thing. And one of us up here working at that time, we're installing the radio direction finder. But we did a lot of work here. We had already given up our apartment and went to a motel to stay. And every night when we came in from work, it seemed like the same TV show was broadcast. I think it was No, doesn't matter. Okay, so here we are. Gonna start here. We're gonna go here. Alaska starts somewhere around here, and Canada starts somewhere around here. All right, so as we were going, we were prepared for customs. We had a list of all the equipment we had, including the shotgun. Canada's not fond of guns. And pulled up, and they said, pull over there. So we pulled over there, and we got this boat behind us, 23-foot cabin cruiser and a 14-foot John boat on top, and it's loaded to the gills, and we're even with the windows behind the station wagon. And I present this, and I present also a little letter from my advisor that said this was partially funded by the U.S. government. So the guy looks at all of this, and he looks at the boat, and he's thinking, I'm going to unpack this boat and look at everything in the car. I don't think I'm going to do that. So he said, oh, well, this is partially supported by the government, and our governments agree with one another. I said, and here's the invoice. And our governments agree with one another. Here's the invoice. Our governments agree with one another. Suddenly the light comes on. Yes, you're passed through. All right, travel time. Here we are on paved highway. Almost 500 miles a day. Not too bad with a 24-foot cabin cruiser behind you. This was a very excellent station wagon. 384 on the floor, a whole bit. Here we get to the Alcan, dirt road, right? Best dirt road in the world, perhaps. Only 300 miles a day, so quite a bit of a drop. Then we get on the river, about 80 miles a day. You can see we're just kind of winding down as we're getting there. So here we are, the 20-foot cabin cruiser and the 14-foot boat, shallow draft, good for the ocean. And here's a typical view of us on the Alcan.
Who's the good-looking guy?
What?
Who's the good-looking guy pumping up?
I don't know who that is. Some fool. Okay, so here's a typical picture of the Alcan when we were there.
Yeah.
In here, if you look real close, there's a pocket scribe, and that pocket scribe is about 4 inches long. That's a line that's the same length as that. It says 4 inches, so that's probably 4 inches. It's maybe 3.5. That's probably 20 microns. There's a wide variety of sizes, but these are the things that are going through our steel-belted radials. Damage to the car and the boat. Now we had 2 flat tires. Not too bad. The car overheated, and the car overheated before we got to Frisco. Before we got to Frisco, we put in a new water pump, new radiator hose. We had the radiator flush to 2 inches of water on Janice's feet. At the end of the Alcan, the clutch had to be replaced for the trip back. And we had cracks in the hull of the boat. Done something I shouldn't have. Oh, good, okay. All right, so here's Janice. When we had, on the Alcan, when we had busted below the radiator hose, we patched it as good as we could with duct tape, and we packed ice in front of the radiator. And here's a typical view while driving the Alcan. You can see the road. You can see the road up here. You can't see the road, but you can see the dust from the cars on the road. And when the dust gets towards you, what you do is you make sure all the windows are shut. You turn on the air conditioning, or in this case, you turn on the heater, which was our air conditioning, and pressurize the car so that the dust doesn't come in, the dust stays out. We had plastic sheeting over the back of the car inside, and there was hardly any dust at the end of the Alcan. The system worked really well. I was glad we got that tip before we went there. Now, somewhere on this road, we hooked up with some geophysicists that were taking an open boat up the Alcan, then they were going to get to Fairbanks, they were going to airlift it to Nome and do some work on the river there. They had lost, first and third gear in their pickup truck on the Alcan. They had lost 3 of 4 fenders on the trailer by the time we met one another. We stayed together for about a day, and the same day that we were going, not seeing one another, there was a ditch across the road, which neither one of us saw. The sun was in our eyes, and you couldn't tell there was a ditch there. And it was probably about, 2 feet wide and a foot deep or something like that. And I swear that the station wagon all 4 wheels were off the ground, because I hit that thing at 60 or 70 miles an hour. And the trailer was off the ground, and the boat was off the trailer, and we all came down, boom, and I was sure that the wheels were going to just pop out and break the suspension, and we were dead in the water. But we survived through that. They survived through it. We talked that night. We both did it, both didn't see it. Okay. We don't have much, we don't have anything in Fairbanks, but the thing is, when we were in Fairbanks, my buddy who was doing the work up in the mountains on glaciers, he had been there the year before, and he had talked to a bunch of people who made friends with the USGS, the United States Geological Survey. And so he had a lot of people that came and talked to me about what I was going to be doing. And babes in the woods, we weren't babes in the woods, we were babes in the ocean. We really didn't understand the amount of boat experience we had. Janice water skied a little bit, I water skied a little bit with a short, small boat. I canoed in my hometown. A couple of times we went offshore to go fishing in a party boat or something like that. That's about the amount, and the ferry going from Jersey to New York. That's about the experience I had on boats. And they said, you don't think you're going to stop someplace and get a pump and fill your 2 10-gallon gas tanks? That's not going to happen. You're going to buy 50-gallon drums. And if you're going to buy 50-gallon drums, you need to buy these 5-gallon tins in wooden boxes with two of them to a box. So we had about 50 gallons worth of fuel in 5-gallon tins, and we'd stop at a place to get some gas. We'd buy the 50-gallon drum, and we'd pump the gas ourselves with a hand pump into the tins. And they also said, there's a lot of mosquitoes in Alaska. Said, you're going to stand the chance of being eaten alive, particularly when you're going down the river and you're going to stop and you're going to be in the boat. We could shut the door, and we had window screens that we put on the windows. He said, you're going to shut the windows, you're going to keep the door open, you're going to buy this product and light it. It's called buhac, and it's basically a sulfur compound, very noxious. So you're going to light it inside where you're going to sleep. It's going to drive all the mosquitoes out. Then you're going to shut everything down, and it works fine. We didn't really get many mosquito bites when we were in the cabin. Janice will talk about mosquitoes later on. But one morning we woke up, and it never gets dark, really. And it looked darker than usual when we looked out the windows. What's going on? Well, we found out that we had the mosquito netting here, the window here closed. The mosquitoes had gotten in behind that netting and packed it so that no light came through. And they died in there. Every night we'd go through this procedure, throwing them out. But the people that Andy met and introduced me to probably saved our lives. And the people in Alaska, when we were there, Alaska's a rough place, so you help everybody. It's just like here. In terms of the people. Okay, so here we are in Nenana. We're going to launch onto, just outside of Fairbanks, we're going to launch onto the Tanana River. Now, the plan was to go to a loading dock. We just back the trailer into the water, take it off, float it off the trailer. Well, I went to look at that loading dock, and at the end of it, there was a 3-foot drop. And I didn't think that was a good way to do it. But luckily, the barge company here had hoists, and they volunteered to launch it for us. And as they picked it up, I realized that we had not put the drain plug in the boat. Any rain would drain out, right? However, probably not good to put it in the water at that point. So I realized that. I got the drain plug and screwed it in. Not as tight as I probably should have, but I screwed it in. And they launched the boat. And this is the flat bottom part, our outboard. These are pressure filters. I'll talk more about later. And that's where we sat and pilot sit up there. All right, we're off. Janice is on the bow trying to make sure we have good vision. I'm back here trying to drive over here. There we are taking off. A friend of mine, well, a friend of Andy's that became a friend of mine that was a student up there at the same time. He took these pictures, so we obviously didn't take the picture. So here's our 23-foot boat. Here's where the motor and the gas tank sit. All under here we have the waterproof compartments with our stored food, sampling stuff and whatever. That's where we slept. There's a board that you put in here, and there's 2-inch mattresses that go on top of that. We have an indoor toilet. We have two typical gas stoves, and we have a sink. So it's pretty set up nicely. And we were on that for quite a while. Now, so we set off. I took my taco sheet with a map for the Tanana River to the barge captain and asked him to mark the channel. And he said, well, last time it was sort of like this. He said, you need to learn to read the river. Because the river will tell you where to go, where the fastest water is. And it's usually in the outside of the bends or down the center. So the fastest, well, you can see here, we've got erosion here where the fast water is. We've got slower water here where it's depositing. Then it goes through the transition, and the cut bank is here and point bar is here. So we decided, in our great wisdom, that the safest place for us was to pitch our, to set our boat on a bar in the middle, so the bears wouldn't get to us. Right? Okay, so we did that. So you can imagine, right in here, there's a bar in the middle, and we've come down river and we run into the bar, and then we set an anchor on shore, and we're good. We're really good. We can't get off of that thing. The water's pushing us on. But an Indian comes by, and he pulls us off, and he says, what you want to do is you want to go to the cut bank and tie yourself to a tree. And then you get off easy. If you're grounded like this, you may have to wait for somebody else to come by the next time. And we took that lesson to heart. And as we're going down this river, 3 days, our typical dinner was a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, not on bread, but on pilot biscuits, which are biscuits about that big around and about that thick, and they're probably the next best thing to hardtack. And here's a typical view down that river. Now that river can be traversed from where we started to where we ended in 8 hours during when they do outboard racing. It took us 3 days. Plugs would fail, and I'd have to pull the plugs and clean the plugs on the motor. I bought too good an oil. I bought all sorts of things to make sure that I didn't have any problems. And I bought this high-priced oil, and it just fouled the plugs if you put it in the regular mixture. And so we had to cut the mixture, and then later we bought cheaper oil. Everything worked out much better. Here's the Army. They're going in. We picked them up on the last day. We traded some 2-day-old stale donuts for a couple of K-rations and a couple of fuses of flares. So we followed them, and we made much better time. And again, you can see all the smoke. And the reason the Army is there is they're running relief into the Nana at the end of this river because they hadn't been able to get any supplies in for the last week or so. So they brought it in by river, and they had native guides. Okay, so here we are at the end. Here is a really nice cabin, log cabin, and you can see there's a ladder going up and under the roof, so they could go clear the roof from the snow, make sure it didn't fall down, and they would get out sometimes on the upper windows because there was just so much snow. And earlier, the year before, I was on a 300-foot cabin cruise, a 300-foot Navy vessel, Coast-Pacific Survey, and we went on to St. Lawrence Island in the middle, and St. Lawrence Island got enough snow that they had 20-foot poles to mark where the road should be, and one year they lost the snows, the top of the poles. They were trying to figure out where they were, and they were moving with a Caterpillar tractor. They got over the Quonset hut for the gym and fell through the floor. And those people all the buildings were connected by a sort of a tunnel system. Okay, so here we are. We're going to head on down. Here's Fairbanks. Here's Tannin on the end of the river, and then we go through Ruby, Galena, and Koyukuk, and Grayling, and then Vic Hall across, and eventually we'll end up in Lockdown. Now, those are the miles between them, which are, and the yellows are the gas stops, right? So we didn't stop for gas there, we didn't stop for gas here. So, the first time we stopped for gas, I pay cash, and they accept it, fine. The second stop for gas, I say, will you take a traveler's check? And they said, yes, we'll take a traveler's check. Third stop, will you take a check from a bank in Fairbanks? Oh yeah, I start to get out all my stuff from LA, right? My firstborn certificate and driver's license and credit cards and all the stuff you gotta show for LA in order to get your check. They don't want any of it. Next stop, will you take a check from a bank in Fairbanks? Oh yeah, no problem. These people are awfully trusting. what is this? That take no questions, no proof of who I am or anything else? Well, that's not exactly true, we found out. We were the talk of the river. They were in radio communication all up and down the river. They knew who we were. They knew that we were good people. They knew that we were going to stop around this time to get gas, and the next town was, so they knew where we were going to be, right? Well, on the way to Galena, oh, here's the Yukon. And this is an aerial view. Think what it looks like down on the water when you're about 5 feet above the water. Where's the channel? That's where you learn to read the river, and you look for float down the river, and you look for bubble trains and all sorts of things to pick where the most likely channel is. Here's a fish camp along the river. People live in towns. When fishing is good, they go out and fish, and they set a camp, and they take it and turn it into salmon jerky. A couple of boats there. Here's a fish wheel. Now you talk about clever people. The salmon, like me, are lazy. When they swim upstream, they have a choice. They can swim in the center where the float is and the fast current is, or they can swim alongside the bank where it's a lot slower and it's easier to swim. So they tend to swim towards the banks. And that means they have to go across the river. As it roads here and deposits there as it moves down. So they build these fish wheels, and they're driven. There's a boards on. There's a place to believe. Nah, I've done it again. Oh, good. Hold on. Yeah. While they're getting help, there's some boards here that the current comes across. Thank you. And drives the fish wheel, right? So the fish wheel is being driven at the bottom, and the river is going that way, so it's being driven this way. Oh, okay, the other way. So it's being driven, and the fish are coming up into it. They get caught, they get dumped out, and stored in a little storage area. And then all they have to do is come and pick up the fish, and once a day, twice a day, pick up the fish, and they don't have to put a hook in, they don't have to get a net in, they don't have to do anything else. It's all automatic. Really slick. There we go. Okay, yeah. All right, so we had more adventures going down the river. We had storms, lots of bailing of rainwater. We had the motor running badly. Before Galena, the drain plug vibrated out. Remember I said I put it on by hand, but I didn't probably get it quite tight enough. So it vibrated out. Janice looked back. I'm looking forward. I'm going forward. Janice looks back and says, "The gas tanks are floating." And I said, "What?" She said, "The gas tanks are floating." And we looked, and I looked, and lo and behold, they were 6 inches higher than they were in the morning. So we turned on the bilge pump. We had a bilge pump. It turned on right away. First time ever. Probably because it was underwater and primed, self-primed, but it worked all right. And I stopped in Galena. Galena was an interesting town. I wanted to find a bolt that I could put in the drain plug hole. I looked all over town, I couldn't find one. I was getting ready to just get hold of some wood and make something that I could just stuck in the hole, thread in. And I looked at these 50-gallon drums, and there was a big bung that you take out, and a small bung. And the small bung is the same thread as the drain plug. God knows why that happened. But when I left Galena, I had 15 spares, and never used another one. Yeah. Okay. One of the nice things, really great things that I saw down the river. In Galena, there was a place called Hobo's Cabin. Hobo's Cabin has burned down. It's been replaced by Sam McGee's Cabin. But Hobo's Cabin was a bar. And it didn't look like much. This doesn't look like much. It was not nice as this. But you go inside, and all along the walls were painted, and they were lettered with the shooting of Dan McGree, service poem. And in addition, there were pictures depicting the various stages of the story. And I wish I'd had a camera to take that and show to you folks. And I tried to find it on the internet and all the rest of that. Can't find anything I can find about Hobo's Cabin, but I can't find anything about the displays. So that's a proxy. Okay, tag team time.
Hi. Gotta adjust this, make sure you can hear me. Sound good? Okay. Holy Cross. We were going down the river, and as Matt mentioned, there are a few mosquitoes on the way. And by the time we'd gotten to Holy Cross, which is about 2/3 of the way to where we were going, to Aluckinock, my ankles were swollen, and I was running a fever, and I said, okay, I'm gonna go see the witch doctor here at Holy Cross. It turns out she wasn't actually a witch doctor. She was a real nurse, which was a nice surprise. And so she bathed my ankles with some alcohol and said, "You need to wear socks, young lady." That was the solution. Bathe them, put socks on. So I did that. Whoops. I wasn't properly trained. Okay. So we finally got to the end of our journey here. We arrived in Aluckinock at 4 o'clock in the morning on July 5th. We no longer knew what was day or night by the time we got there, so it was 4 o'clock in the morning. The professor, Matt's major professor, and he had 2 helpers, Pat and Mark, and they were going to do river sampling, whereas we were going to do sampling in the ocean, where the river meets the ocean, that interface. The professor decided to move the base to Aluckinock instead of Demonic for a couple of reasons. He said there were fewer mosquitoes, and it turned out that that was true, because they sprayed in Aluckinock and they did not spray in Demonic. So I was very happy to have fewer mosquitoes, even though there were still some, but fewer. They also found a cabin to use for the helpers. Matt and I were going to stay on the boat all summer, but the 2 helpers, Pat and Mark, were going to stay in what turned out to be a cook's cabin. All right, I've got to make sure I keep my finger on the go forward button. So just a picture here of where Demonic was relative to Aluckinock. So we were coming down the Yukon River, and up above there is Demonic. And then they decided we should be in Aluckinock, so we go to Aluckinock. And we arrived in Aluckinock on July the 7th. And that was officially the end of our trip, 700 miles down the river. So that was a great day. Aluckinock, let me tell you a little bit about that. That is an Eskimo name. And the name was given by the Russians. It means place of mistake or wrong way. But we were happy to be there. The village was first reported by the U.S. Coast and Geodetic Survey in 1899. And the post office was established in 1946. It was incorporated as a second-class city, actually the year we were there, 1969, with about 300 residents, 92% native. Right now, well, when I wrote the slide, there were about 700 people. There are a few more now, but not many more. And a salmon cannery provided the major source of employment there. I did it again. Here we go. Climate. Aluckinock is subarctic, so it averages about 60 inches of rainfall every year, of snowfall, and 19 inches of rain. Perry gets about 46 inches of precipitation total. So it was wet a lot. Temperatures range from -25 to 79. It never ever got to 79 out where we were. Earlier when you saw me playing with the ice, in the short sleeve thing, that was not a Luckenough. The Luckenough never got to 79, so heavy winds are frequent during the fall and winter, and it is used as an ice road during the winter from May through November. There are no roads there, so that's how they could get around. This is kind of a schematic of where we were in the Luckenough. You see, there's a cabin there. Probably see that with my magic machine here, cabin. That was the cook's cabin where the two helpers, Pat and Mark, set up their station. And the barge right there in front of it is where we tied up our boat, and that's where we were hanging out. The cannery right up there. They had closed for the season, and that's why they were able to use the cook's cabin. Over here is Elias Joseph's house. He was the council chief. So that's the head guy in the village. Let's see, we have an airfield over here. We were able to fly out at the end of our trip. We didn't have to go all the way back up the river. The boat stayed there for the summer. Over here was a store, which occasionally we would go and visit. We did take a lot of our stuff, but at the store you could buy a loaf of bread or some Spam or different things like that. Let's see, missionary. There were a man and woman, a couple, and two young boys that were missionaries there, and they were building a chapel. And I think I've about covered everything there. So let's go see what else we can find. Oh, well, that's our boat. Just to review, it's a 23-foot cabin cruiser. We're tied up here right now, not on the barge, but just at the cut bank. And as Matt said, it had bunk beds, fold out. It had one burner stove, a toilet, a sink, and electricity from batteries, which worked sometimes. There's a cannery barge pulled up. As I said, when it gets cold, they pull everything out of the river, otherwise the ice just crushes it. So the cannery barge had already been pulled up, and it was on the shore there. That's the cabin. That's me in the doorway there. And you can see some oil drums kind of to the left there, because it had the oil stove and oven. You can, maybe far over on the right over the, whoops, didn't mean to do that. Whoops, okay. Back. Back. Okay. Get my pointer. Okay, over here. Matt thought that what would happen would be he would make these cute little floats. And when we went out to sea to do sampling, he would stick them out there, and then we'd have a path for the next time. Guess how long they lasted? But there were the oil drums over here, and that's how we got the oil. So we didn't have running water in the cabin here. We did have electricity, an oil stove, a sink, a tub, and a bucket in the bathroom. Mm. Sometimes it was really wet and stormy, and the boat would be, doing this. And so we just get our sleeping bags and go up to the cabin there and hunker down on the floor, which beat rocking all night. So that's Matt and his sleeping bag there. And then you can see we got boxes and boxes there where we had supplies. We were lucky right here is a radio. The missionaries loaned us a radio for our stay there so that we could listen to the Weather Channel and figure out whether it was a safe day to go out or not, which mostly it wasn't. But, we could listen to that. And we also got to listen to the landing of of Apollo 11 on the moon that happened while we were up there. How did we get the ding in the top of our boat? See that little thing up there with the red arrows pointing? One night there was a storm such that the boat was rocking We were tied up, you know, and there's a post you're tied to, and it was rocking so much, it tipped it over that much and put a ding in the top. Fortunately, we were not in the boat when that actually happened. Here I am cooking, probably a salmon. Early in the season, we got lots of king salmon that they would catch, and those were really, really yummy. Later in the season, they call them dog salmon because they think all the good ones have gone, and these that are left are only fit for the dogs. They still tasted good. They were about 50 cents for a whole fish, you know, so we cooked those, and we thought it was really yummy. Anyhow, so I am working on cooking there. We didn't know that we'd be able to stay in the cabin when we prepared for this. So have any of you ever used a reflector oven? Any campers here? I'm seeing a couple of nods, okay. Well, we tested one out ahead of time. So it's basically a metal box and you put it in front of a fire and it gets hot enough so it will actually cook stuff, you know, bake things. So we did try it out. We never actually used it because whenever we wanted to bake something, we had that cabin with an oven, and so we do that instead. We had lots of freeze-dried food, as Matt mentioned, and one of our favorite things was the pork chops. They were really good. Well, he liked the applesauce, but the applesauce with the pork chops was really, really good. Necessities. You gotta have certain things, right? So, water. There was a pond behind the cabin, and but we couldn't drink the water. The people who lived there could drink that water, but not us. We hadn't built up our immunity to the thingies that were running around in the water. And so we would have to boil it or filter it before we could use it. For laundry, have any of you ever done this? Had a plumber's helper and a big old tub that you fill up with water, you put your dirty stuff in there with some soap, and you go whooshy, 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 whooshy. And then you dump all that out, you put clean water in there, whooshy, 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 and hang it up on the line. You've never done that? Oh, you missed a treat, a real treat. Let's see, and we had a shower, sort of. I'm going to show it to you in the next slide. But basically, it's a tub that's on blocks. There was no running water, so there was no faucet coming into this tub. So what we did was we heated water up on the stove, and we put it in a 5-gallon bucket. We hoisted the bucket up over the tub, and we had a hose in it. You turn the hose thing, and you'll wet yourself down, turn it off, so, turn it on, rinse off, and you're done. You can do that in 5 gallons. Both of us. Not at the same time. A honey bucket for the toilet. I never understood why they called it a honey bucket, but that's what they called it. But you have to take the contents of that bucket outside and bury it.
Honey, would you take it out?
Oh, Matt says it's because honey, would you take it out? That's why it's a honey bucket. So this is a picture of our bathroom. I am leaning over pretending I'm washing my hair while Matt's taking this picture. So you can sort of see the hose over there coming down. So there's a 5-gallon bucket hanging up there. And the arrow to our toilet with the honey bucket there. And we left civilization on June the 27th. And our first fancy shower like this was in July 18th. So you may have seen pictures from the old days where you have a tub or a basin or a pretty bowl and you've got water in it and you've got a washcloth. So that's what we had up until we got this fantastic shower, which is really great. Sometimes it was cold. I have this on because I wasn't just posing for a picture. Sometimes it was really cold and muddy. You can see the boots, mud boots there, rubber boots there. So it was cold, and this was in July. This is a picture of the barge that came down with stuff for the store, and the Rampart was the name of the boat that pushed it along, and the captain was Mr. Flannery. So we got to know him. They didn't come every week, but it came periodically, and stuff would come to the store, and go to the store and see what was there. What I wanted you to notice on this one are these posts over here. See those posts right there? They have those all along the bank, because when it freezes up and then the ice starts moving later, it just tears everything out, you know, as it's coming down the channel there. So if anything's still in the channel, it gets taken care of, smushed to pieces. But they put those posts there to try to make sure it doesn't go any further over on the land than where the posts are. Oops, did I skip one? Oh, that's the missionary's house, it's kind of a trailer, and the chapel they were building. When we had any extra time, then Matt would go over and help them with that. And she would invite me over, us over, and give us dinner sometimes, and make cookies. So it was very nice to have folks there. These were two kids. I think I mentioned Elias before. He was the council president, or the chief of the village, so to speak. He had two kids, Mike, 5, and JJ, 3. Mike had a wrist rocket launcher, and JJ had a BB gun. And so one day, JJ and Mike come to visit. JJ says, "Can I shoot out your windows?" He was really cute. And we said, "No, you cannot do that." And he didn't, thank goodness. But they were cute. They would visit frequently because we were an oddity, you know. Missionaries and us, we were the only different people around. Fishing was very important to the economy, as we mentioned before, because of the cannery. And so this is just one of the fishing boats from one of the residents that's been pulled up. They do dry their fish so that they have more to eat during the winter time when they can't be catching fish. We did not try any of the dried fish. It didn't look all that yummy to me, and as long as they were giving me dog salmon, I was happy. I wanted you to see the kinds of things that they had around their cabin. So there's a variety of things here. You can see a reasonably modern bicycle over here. Over here. Got a, whatever that thing is called. Sled. Snowmobile. I forgot for a minute. I was calling it a little ice machine. A snowmobile over here. And we got a dog sled here. And there's another snowmobile back there. So they had all kinds of stuff for getting around. The dogs that were used to pull the dog sled were typically chained to a log somewhere so they wouldn't be running away, but not all the dogs were chained up. I have a couple of pictures of the village. So you'll notice that this lady with a kid on the back is not wearing shorts. It is not warm there. We're talking probably August at the time we're taking this picture. Another young lady in front of the house. Some of the kids would come over and they would just want to come in and sit down in the cabin and just look at us. Because we were different. And they would just sit there, and so we tried to make small talk, you know, and talk to them. I mean, they could speak English. It wasn't they couldn't speak English, but they just liked to look at us. So we were an oddity. Another lady with a couple of kids. Not all the cabins were tidy. And so this is just another one that was down the way. You can see the laundry hanging out on the line, which is what I had to do. And this is a row of cabins. So they stayed reasonably close together because if you wanted to visit somebody, you didn't want to be trekking through the snow and ice too far. And you notice there is kind of a little gravelly path there a little bit in front of this row of cabins so that they could walk there without having to walk through the mud and the snow and the ice, you know, sometimes. They had a sweat lodge, a kashim. We were not allowed to go in there, and so we didn't try to go in there, but they did allow me to take a picture of the outside of it, so I could do that, but we weren't allowed to go in there. We almost lost our boat. You saw that ding that was on the top of the boat I showed you earlier when the storm came and it was blowing it? Well, the storm came through, and the boat that was tied up to the barge dock thing there came loose from the moorings. So that boat wandered out into the channel and was proceeding to go down the Yukon River, out to the sea. Fortunately, we noticed that it wasn't where it was supposed to be. So we still had Pat and Mike and Matt, so I watched from shore. And so they hop in the little boat, the little 14-foot boat, and go out there and put some anchor and get on the big boat and put anchors down, so it would stay in the channel. And then they came back to shore, came inside, and then we looked again in a little while, and it was going down the channel, pulling the anchors along. So they get back in the boat, and they go out there, and they do more stuff, and they put more anchors out, and they finally stop the thing from trying to leave us. That would have been really bad, because that was what we were supposed to be doing with that boat, was going out to sea and getting these samples. If we didn't have a boat, that'd be kind of a problem with a little 14-foot, small horsepower thing. Anyway, so finally the boat got rescued and they brought it back to the barge, and the storm had quieted down enough that they tied it on the side, where the storm was coming this way, they tied it on that side so it wouldn't keep banging up against the side of the dock there, the barge dock. So that was an exciting adventure. I watched from shore. So, summary of our adventures on my part. In Alaska, mosquitoes, called the state bird. I don't know if you've heard that. I had a lot of adventures with mosquitoes. We had fires on our boat that never caught the whole thing on fire, but electrical fires. A lot of storms, a lot of leaks. Matt talked about some of them. The storm that I just mentioned that almost caused us to lose the big boat. We got to spend some time in the cabin versus spending all of our time on the boat. So when it was really stormy, we did have a place, where we didn't have to be out there rolling about. And as I said, we got to listen to the moon landing there. We found the people there to be very, very helpful. So the whole time that we were in the village, I was never frightened of any of, or going down the river. As Matt said, apparently they were keeping track of us, but we didn't know that. Never frightened of any of the people that we encountered. However, I wanted to read you before I turn this over to Matt. He's going to start talking about going out to sea. And you have 2 minutes, Matt. I can get to I can't read from your book. I kept a diary, and so I would write every day what was happening that day. And I want to share with you what was happening on July the 25th. This was 20 days after we had arrived in Alukana. Woke up at 9:30 a.m. The sun was shining, so it's not too cloudy. We hope to go out today. 20 days after we got there was the first day we thought we were able to go out due to the weather. It didn't rain last night, so everything is almost dry, a real happening. We packed the boat and left at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. By then, the wind had come up, and it was rather choppy out there on the water. We had problems getting out of the channel. We got on the sandbar, and so we had to get the small motor, the 7 horsepower motor. You pulled up the big one, put the small one to work, and pulled off the sandbar, and once you got off, then you put the big one down. Okay. So we did that about 3 times, and we finally got off that sandbar and got down the road a little bit. So then we started, and we finally got out in the channel. We went for a little bit of a while, and then as the wind does it when it's in the afternoon, the waves kicked up. And so they were about 4-foot waves, and we're in this little shallow draft, 23-foot boat, and it was getting kind of rough, and things were splashing all over. So we learned 2 lessons that day. Lesson number 1, a shallow draft boat is not good for going out in the ocean. It's okay for a river, And the second thing was, don't go out in the afternoon, because that's when the wind picks up, at least in that part of the country. You should go out early in the morning. So all of our other trips were early in the morning. And I'm not sure how you're gonna do this, Nat, but here you go.
It's okay if anybody gets tired and disappears.
Yeah. I meant to mention on the Alcan, there is a book called The Milepost. And mile by mile and tenth of a mile by mile, it tells you what you're gonna run into as you come up the road. And that's invaluable. Okay, so we're gonna go out to sea. And we set up the A-frame, pressure filters. This is a sampler for about, I don't know, 20 gallons of water, something like that. And Janice said, the first time we went out, it was eye-opening. The first time we went out, we saw the white caps. We started out. I got out there and we're going out to sea in the river, up and down the waves. It's all right. I start thinking, well, let's see. We're gonna go out in the open ocean. I'm gonna set an anchor. I'm gonna sit on top of the motor in the back, lower this sampler down, pull it back up full of water, and I'm gonna kill myself. So we turned around. Turning around was something else. After we turned around, not really much of a problem, but the wind is blowing the waves offshore. So when you follow the waves, it's not too bad. But when you go into the waves and they're at an angle, you go up the wave, you come to the crest, the prop comes out of the water. You no longer have steerage. Then you go down to the other side by momentum and the wave comes into you. And you've got to kick over away from the bank because the next couple of waves are going to push you right into the bank. So you got to move away from it, down into the trough, keep moving away, up the next one, and try to get squared so that when you come up on the crest, you're perpendicular to it, and you don't roll over when you get on the other side. So there was a bit of maneuvering that I had to go through, and I didn't want to have to do that again. So the thesis got redefined. It's no longer a study of the Yukon River Delta interface between fresh and saltwater. It's the same thing, but it's only 3 days after the last small craft warning. Okay, so 2 months, we tried to get out to sea 6 times. Those were the 6 times in the 2 months that were in excess of 3 days after the last storm, small craft warning. Not what I had expected to do, but actually worked out pretty well because it took me over a year to process the samples, and if I had as many samples as I wanted to, I'd probably still be processing the samples. So maybe that worked out all right. 2 times we got out there, calm water, looks good. Turned on the voice of God from Nome at 6 o'clock because we left at 3 o'clock, took us 3 hours out to get out there. And the voice of God would say, small craft warning, 8 feet in. Usually we made it before the storm touches. So we got 4 times sampling, and we got enough stuff to do it. I could have used more sampling. You can always use more data. There's no questions about that. There's never enough data. Okay, so we were here in Ellicott, coming out this slough, going down this river, getting out here, and we want to know where we are, right? So get on back. You can see there's not much there to locate. You've got deep water. Oh, good, sorry. We got some deep water where it's dark, shallower water, the river, something going on down here. Shoot. So I got this bright idea. I'd make some buoys, get a flag, I could see it from a ways, put a weight on the end of it, inner tube to keep it to float. Good idea. That picture is the only evidence that that was ever seen by a human being. Never saw it again. Put 6 of them out there. They're in Russia as far as I know. But we lucked out, and for some reason, somebody had placed oil drums out just about far enough that you could see the next oil drum when you were at the oil drum. So we just went from oil drum to oil drum and figured out that's where we were. We were that far apart. Where we were, whether we were in Russia, onshore US, no telling, but that's where we were. And here we are on the Delta. That's not what I expected. There are channels. We had to stay in the channel. So my advisor had decided to hire one of the pilots in the village to take us out to show us how to do this. So he went full steam out. I pushed him off the sandbar. He went full steam again, pushed him off the sandbar. Full steam again, pushed him off the sailbar. I think, this is not the way it ought to be. There was a case where they had, I suppose, gone down to San Francisco and bought some 40-foot boats, and they were trying to find the mouth of the Delta, and they were 40 miles off of Nome. They were completely lost. So it's easy to get lost out there. And that's where I sit to grab the sample. That's the sample bucket there. It's already expanded and it's got water in it. That yellow thing collapses. You set it down in the water, send down a messenger, which is the weight, slides down the cable, trips that, bottom falls out and gathers that sample. Okay, worried about millipore filters. 0.45 micron. I found a sample, they filter out bacteria. That's the kind of sample. Anything coarser than that is what I got, what I sampled. And actually sample less than 0.45 because once you get a little bit of the filter cake, then it passes water a lot slower. And in this case, normal filters, when you think about it, if you just put the water on top of the filter, the water filters down through. But that's only a pressured column that's a couple inches high, water above atmosphere. So often they put vacuums on them. That puts 14.7 less pounds per square inch pressure through. I've got these big, tall columns. I'm putting pressure in the top. I'm putting 100 pounds of pressure on top of that. So my filter rate is a good bit higher, and it still takes close to a day to get that much water through one of those filters, 6-inch filter. Where were we? Like I said, I didn't care. We're on this buoy and this buoy and this buoy. What I cared about was what the salinity of the water was. My advisor had bought 2 salinity gauges, electronics that you put over the side of the boat that tells you what salinity is. The first one never worked. He bought them used. His first degree was in economics. He knew how to pinch a penny, let me tell you. The second one went over the side and made a reading. After it came up, it never worked again. I gave a talk at UCLA among the graduate students without the faculty there about what I was going to do. One of them, who was a professor now, or was a professor at Dallas, said, "You don't expect that to work." He said, "Well, I got a second." He said, "That won't work either." He said, "You need a separate method of doing it." you need to do it with titrations. I mean, normally you do titrations with a pet cop in a graduation. This time, we did it with syringe. Janice learned to do it with syringes. So this is what she had. Those 2 syringes, the reagents, and she would tell me, we're at this salinity. And I said, okay, that's good. We'll take a sample and I look at a nice sunset. Now, so I don't know where I am in space. I know where I am on the river, and I know what the salinity is, and that's enough. We tried to locate. Okay, so we shot a sighting on this mountain over here, a little bitty mountain. Took one over here, and took one radio direction finder for the voice of God known, and plotted the triangle of confidence. The first triangle of confidence was about probably 10 miles, 20 miles. Not very useful. I did it a second time, and I got a very nice, small triangle of confidence. It was about probably a 50th of the original one. The problem with it was on shore. So it just didn't work all that well. So we'd like to say goodbye to Alakanuk, and I'm going to say hello to another part of Alaska for you. That's the days of what we spent there. Now we're going to go to Big Delta, and we're going to fly out of Alakanuk to get there. So here's my other buddy who's going to be doing the mountains and the glaciers. This is his tent. His second year tent. So that's his tent, white top. That's his storage tent. You can barely see it, but there's a sort of an A-frame with a big tub of water on top of it. And out here somewhere there's an outhouse. The outhouse is really just a little table support to sit on and then nothing else around it. You picked up your toilet seat inside the cabin, went outside, put the toilet seat on it, sprayed off all over everything, and then took care of business. Here's the inside of his tent, second year. Here's a jerry can full of water. There is a hose that provides water to this, and there's a recirculating system because there's a coil inside the wood-burning stove so that you can have hot water. So we have hot and cold water running. And of course, I helped him build some of this stuff, like he helped me build mine. Here's his bed, platform bed. There was a table here that you can't see that we play bridge at. We've got a white top tent, so we can play bridge all summer, all night long, without having to have any additional light. And here's the backyard moose. This moose is about 100 yards from the tent. And it's resting its antlers and sleeping and picking up when a car goes by and just kind of cooling out. So we call up a friend of ours who is 20 miles that way and say there's a moose in the backyard, easy shot if you want to take it, because he couldn't process fat very well. So he ate wild game all the time. So the girls go 25 miles the other way to call him on the phone. They set out, get part way and say, that moose is not going to be there. Oh, well, we'll go visit anyway. So they come and the moose is still there. So now there's a little concern, is the moose helping? And shoot the moose. He field dresses it. We get the head and we get the pelt. We try to tame the pelt, that didn't work very well. And we left the moose head for the next night. We're going to cut the antlers off. So we gotta cut the antlers off. And there's the moose head. There's the entrails. They've been scratched and covered over with dirt. So a bear come by, took care of all this stuff, and dragged the moose head away. We found the moose head, cut that off. The bear had eaten the nose off the moose, which is the tenderest part on the head, and a little bit of the meat on the shoulders. And we took the moose head, and I had that for quite a while until we went through Montana one time, and some kids decided to take it off the car. Okay, we left LA, and we returned to LA. And we came back. We didn't drive the Alcan. We came back on the inland ferries. Both of us. You wanna
That's
say
it. Any questions?
Wait, how long did it take the professor to give okay for your research so that he could grant you the PhD?
Could you say that again, please?
Yeah, yeah.
I know it's a long.
Good idea.
How long did it take your professor to grant his okay for all of the research you did and give you your PhD? I mean, did you have to?
So virtually no effort on my advisor's part.
So when you got back, you were granted your
When we
PhD?
got back, he said, we're going to Chicago. And so off we went to Chicago and I built a lab for him.
Oh, okay.
You really don't want to get into my advisor.
And we went to Chicago between semesters, so I'm from Florida, as some of you may know. So we left Los Angeles towing a trailer with our stuff in it in December and arrived in Chicago in a snowstorm. And he had broken his wrist, so I had to drive. And then I had to go find a job. It's a tough one.
I drug this one all over the country before I got a gainful employment, and I owe her everything in the world.
The land that you were in was very rough. It was very primitive. And I'm just wondering, it's been, 55 years. Do you know, has anything changed, or the way the people live, or the numbers of people, or anything?
The number of people have gone from 200 to about 700 and almost 800 now. And I was looking it up today to see what was happening there. The cannery that I showed you the picture of was there when we were there in '69, but it closed in 1970, primarily due to extra regulations and things of that nature. So they did close the cannery. So when I tried to look up, I did look up, what's the primary source of income for the people who are there now? And it's really a whole variety of sort of researchy sort of things and health facilities and that sort of kind of thing. They don't really have any industry there. So
Can
it's
you
still a very
imagine to sell
primitive village.
multiple t-shirts like this for a lucka?
Yeah, I got these off Amazon. I just said, maybe I could get an Nug t-shirt from somewhere. So I typed in Amazon Nug and voila. How about that?
Anything else?
How often did you sample?
How often did I what?
How often did you sample?
Well, we went out 4 times.
4 times.
4 times that we were able to get samples. And we had multiple samples at that, so I probably had a total of 25 samples or something like that. And they were, when I processed them, they were size separated into about 10 different sizes. And I did X-ray mineralogy on all of those and other things. And I had samples from suspended sediment, which was what I used for the thesis. I could have continued on taking samples, or processing samples that I got from the Bering Sea in total from the year before, or from the substrate, the bottom of the river, but I didn't process those. The truth is, the type of material I look at is very rarely looked at because it's so intensive to do the processing. The only people who really do much of it are the people in soils. I didn't know that at the time.
I learned a new word while he was doing this. This magic word is called flocculation. Flocculation, that's the process of stuff bumping onto other stuff. And the reason I remember it is I had to type this thesis.
In freshwater, it didn't happen. When it hits salt water, then the electrolytes, the particles are charged and they start to group together. And the thesis was that montmorillonite, which has more age effects, is more likely to do that, and I would get mineral separation. I didn't see that because A, the particles themselves are not minerals. They are groups of minerals held together by iron oxides in organic matter. So you're not going to think about a particular mineral, clay mineral, you're going to think about a mixture of them. And so it's hard to tell whether it's the mixture that's doing it or whether it's the electrolytes. And on top of that, it's just, there's too much energy in the system.
What was your object in the whole thing?
PhD.
The object was to get my union card.
To get your diet.
It was to try to understand this process, which could not be understood because the environment is so dominant that you can't find that small little change. Now, I documented some recirculation of material because when the fresh water rides over the salt water, the fresh water eventually becomes saline, and it becomes saline because at the bottom, the water, salt water below it moves up and mixes with it. And so that was supposed to be where it was going to settle out, but the whole premise was wrong because I was in the wrong environment, all sorts of things. I did a little bit of lab research on it, sitting there.
Okay? Thank you all.
Thank you.